Welcome to Business Minds. This week, we introduce you to Ben Murchison, Manager of Corporate PR and Earned Performance at Four Seasons.
Really simply, it just means I take the data, I put a story around it, and I help present it to both internal and external audiences.
Self-claimed, data-driven storyteller,
Part of my role is to work alongside the local property PRDs and property PR professionals to improve the way that they work.
in this interview, he takes us behind the scenes of the public relations field and shows us that curiosity can take you a long way.
There's a saying in this industry, it's PR, not ER. They're talking about what Kardashian was at the Four Seasons 20 minutes ago, 30 seconds ago.
Make sure to subscribe and enjoy the episode. Welcome to Business Minds. Today we are delighted to receive Ben Murchison, Manager of Corporate PR and Earned Performance at Four Seasons. Ben, thank you very much for being with us today. So my first question is to try and ask you to define your role in just a few words so our audience can understand a bit better what you do.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Business Minds. My role, I am Ben Murchison, Manager of Corporate PR and Earned Performance. And my role is I really am a data-driven storyteller. So I bring the qualitative and quantitative data to our PR practice to help drive insights to action. It's a new role within our organization, which is quite exciting. It's really at the forefront of this industry right now as we bring in data practices to really drive how we think about PR as marketing and PR shift. It's an exciting time and an exciting role within our organization.
Excellent, thank you. We will dig into that a bit more later. So first of all, we like to ask our guests about their background to understand where their stories start.
Of course.
So my first question is very simple. Where did you grow up and what kind of job were you dreaming to do as a kid?
That's a great question. I grew up in Ottawa, Ontario for the most part, with about 5.5 years I spent in Brooklyn as a kid. But for the most part, I think I really dreamed about being a doctor. My mom is a family physician, and I thought that would be such a cool job. But science and math weren't necessarily my strong suit. So I did a lot of performance as a kid, and my career now is really an amalgamation of my interest in performance and science, combined now with a performance background to kind of tell stories in an interesting way.
Okay, and so were you considered by your peers or your surroundings at a young age a good communicator early on?
I think so. I think I was considered someone who knew how to tell a story pretty well.
Excellent. And so what did you study exactly? And did you already have a clear goal in mind while doing your studies?
100% no. I had no clear idea, actually. I think I changed my major about 8 times. I went to University of Toronto undergrad, about like 3-4 blocks from where we are right now. And I studied political science. I started with political philosophy, the very, free-thinking humanities version of philosophy in poli-sci. And I went all the way to the other end of the spectrum and started doing what's called qualitative or quantitative research, primary research, and doing election polling. Because halfway through my degree, I said, I want to learn a real skill and have something employable out of this. And that's where it landed me, which is cool. It was a really cool degree, but there wasn't really anything for me to do with that for the most part. So I moved to Korea and tried to figure my life out. I taught English, and while there, I found someone who worked in PR. They became a good friend of mine and inspired this whole career. I went to Humber and did a postgrad, and that's kind of how I now find myself in PR.
Excellent. Well, quite an interesting journey. And so still in your younger years, who were your inspiration figures? Did you have any role models growing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say my role models growing up would be my parents. They both managed to fit it all in. My dad's an economist. My mom's a family doctor. They managed to, raise a family and do all these things in a single day. And I sometimes manage and think what I do in a day. And I think, wow, how do I also fit in children, food, and groceries and all that? So they were definitely my role models growing up.
Excellent. And so now focusing more on your career as a whole. So you mentioned your little stay in Korea.
Yeah.
What was your first job? How did your career start, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. My first job in my career was in between that period of time. So I had just come back from Korea. I kind of knew I was going to do this postgrad, but I needed a job. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and do PR. I should get a job in PR. And this was around 2018. And tech companies were a big part of that era. If you remember in 2018, a lot of people, it was kind of like the beginning and height of Uber. And so I joined this startup with only about 5 other employees called rentals.ca. And I was hired to do their PR. They had never done PR. And it was this amazing job where I got to take a lot of risks and do some incredible work while learning what PR was. And that's a pretty rare thing in your career, to be able to start it in an environment where you could just take big risks all the time. But yeah, that was an amazing career moment for me. And it really brought together this practice. When I think about data-driven storytelling, it all started with that first job.
Okay. And so you mentioned the data-driven storytelling part of your job. Maybe it's a good time to define what is public relations for those who do not know.
100%. Yeah. So public relations is really a field in where, if you think about marketing and you think about PR and comms, the role of marketing is to drive sales and to drive monetary action from a consumer, whereas the role of communications and PR, for the most part, PR, is to drive reputation. In today's modern workplace and in the way we think about and drive business today, the line between marketing and the line between PR is really ever shifting. And we're all now really, as practitioners, marketers. So I may use a PR tactic some days, but I may also use paid marketing tactics as well. What consumers and how consumers are consuming news is drastically changing even this year. So that line between what is PR and what is marketing is now ever thinner.
Very clear. Thank you very much. So back to your career path now. Can you walk us through the main steps of your career? What were the key turning points that made your career what it is today?
Yeah, 100%. So I will kind of break that down. That first job at rentals.ca was a really unique opportunity for me. I was paid not a lot of money, but I was given a lot of runway. I Googled on my first day, what is media relations?
Okay.
Not a lot of people can get a job and then Google what it is on day one. I was one of those people, and I was very blessed, and I think back on that time incredibly well. It really, what my job was, very simply there, was to get our company mentioned in the media more. We saw that if we had a little mention on CBC, people would backlink to our website more. And my whole job with my CEO was just to make us better than our competitor when it came to these backlinks.
Okay.
How did we do that? Well, we had a supply of data that we knew nobody else had. We knew how much it cost to rent an apartment in any part of Canada at any given time.
Okay. Wow.
And that the federal government only reported on that once a year through the CMHC. So we knew that the media would be really interested to be able to produce that fact on an ongoing basis, which is the exact opposite way of generally how media relations works. Generally, in media relations, you're fighting for a journalist to come and write your story with you and write about the shampoo or the event you just had. We had the incredible opportunity of reversing the supply and demand. The journalists were coming to us, which is crazy. And I was able to get front page of CBC.ca, national, with my name on it, like in the first job of my career, which is undeniably, uncrazily results I still don't have to this day. But I was able to get at that job, which is so cool. And some of the highlights of my life some of the highlights of my career so far were within that role.
Okay, excellent. How about the rest? What happened later on?
Yeah, for sure. So I left rentals.ca to then join a agency because I was doing the scrappy PR where I was figuring things out as I go. But I didn't really have the groundwork or basis in my career yet, or really the skills or foundation to grow it. So I went and joined one of the world's largest PR firms, Edelman, and I worked within their insights and analytics team because at Rentals, I realized there's this really unique intersection between data and PR. And that's where that data-driven storytelling came. I had this housing data. I was writing a housing report that then the media came and they really loved that data source. How do I take that as a practice and grow it? Well, I grew it at Edelman. I worked within their insights team to do all that same kind of insights, data-powered work, but for 10 clients at a time at scale for mostly Canadian audiences. And that was an incredible experience. I learned a lot and it helped me build the hard skills I needed to be successful in my career. It was basically kind of like a 2.5-year, what we would say like a PR MBA that I got to experience there. I will say, unfortunately, and I can get into this a little bit later, I burnt out from that job. It was the pandemic. I was working quite a bit of hours and it was tough. So I had to take some time off. And I then ventured into a new role doing corporate comms at a lab called Dynacare. It was an immensely altruistic experience because I would really chance to work on CSR and give back to communities. I ran diabetes programs and helped be a part of their Dynacare for Diabetes campaigns. And I was able to take some time to really invest in myself, which was very important. And then I came into this role, which is a combination of all the roles before it. It's PR, it's data-driven storytelling, it's bringing that insights component in, but I also do and run full consumer campaigns and at global scale. So it's really where I am now is a full amalgamation of all the career decisions I've made before, and it's a really unique space where I'm getting to change how our industry thinks about PR, which is cool.
Excellent. And so can you tell us the story of how you were recruited to your current role? How
Yeah.
the opportunity was presented to you?
I wish it was a more interesting story. It is just a LinkedIn DM that I received by simply, I think, just having that data-driven storyteller tag in my profile. That's just how the recruiter found me.
So these tags on LinkedIn matter. That's what you're saying.
I'm
We would
saying
not think about it.
that LinkedIn branding and that whole little 3-word phrase that I made up one day when I was working at rentals.ca have taken me to where I am today.
That might be very inspiring for some people. Thank you very much for this.
No worries.
So can you dig a little bit more about your current role?
Yeah.
What exactly fall into your responsibilities? Because so Four Seasons is a Canadian.
Yeah, Four Seasons is a Canadian brand. Not a lot of people know that. Canadian founded all the way back in the late 60s. And it is a globally recognized brand, which is an exciting place to work. It lives by the golden rule, which is the foundation of our company: treat others as you'd like to be treated. It's a fantastic place to work in the sense of it's the first role I've had where I work at a global scale. So I work for our corporate office and have a hand in each of the different markets. We have over 120 properties. And it's an exciting place to work mostly because we're a small but nimble team, and part of my role is to work alongside the local property PRDs and property PR professionals to improve the way that they work, and more so support them in their ongoing PR duties. And that's really thinking about how they can use the practice that they do to drive what I consider insights to action. How do we at a global scale monitor the performance of what our PR actions are and optimize it to then even further improve our guest acquisition. Our whole goal within my practice is to drive brand preference, which basically just means improve how our key audiences think about us. And we do that through a holistic framework that really just means anytime you read about us, may it be on social media, may it be on earned media or through an influencer, we really want you to have a positive reaction. And I help learn about how those interactions are happening and then drive action through new integrated strategies. Really simply, it just means I take the data, I put a story around it, and I help present it to both internal and external audiences.
Okay, this is very interesting. Can you give a bit more details?
Yeah.
How are you able to measure the impact of your actions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a vendor partner who helps us do earned media measurement through some unique tools that ingest the earned media data, give us a set of KPIs. We look at it generally from a competitive lens. So we look at our share of voice and share of prominence,
That makes sense.
which look at the qualitative and quantitative outputs of our earned media presence. And we then measure ourselves against our competitors within the space.
Okay, excellent. And so throughout your career so far, as you said, you worked for Edelman, where you probably worked for a variety of projects.
Yeah, 100%.
Then you went into the medical field with Dynacare, and now a hotel resorts group. What do you think is specific about each field working in PR, especially in Four Seasons, the hotel kind of group that you're working in right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first space. So when I first started my career, I didn't think I would ever work in consumer PR.
Okay.
When I was at Edelman, it wasn't something that attracted me. I thought I was really into corporate PR in the sense of, a little bit of harder news. I had started in housing, which was very hard data and hard, impactful human stories. But I've fallen now into consumer PR, which I really love because there's, at a global scale, a lot of amazing, interesting stories. I work a lot more on fashion and entertainment, and a little more softer media sides. And there's a lot of unique insights that we can gather and learn from that very fast-moving media cycle. It moves a lot faster than you'd think. I worked at a lab before. Genetics articles, take years sometimes to produce, and they're much more research-focused. they're talking about what Kardashian was at the Four Seasons 20 minutes ago, 30 seconds ago. It's a lot faster pace, which is a really exciting way to work.
Excellent. And so you also mentioned that since you're a manager, you're leading a team of people like all throughout the country. Is that correct? Or
No, so I don't lead. I'm about to start leading a single team member, but I do collaborate with quite a wide network of teams, and I sit and manage a vendor team of about 8 or so analysts who help compile the data. So through vendor management, I do manage quite a few, but through direct lines of reports, it's just currently one. But we do work with quite a wide variety of a global agency network to help support our ongoing media relations. So from an extension, it's over a couple hundred people, but from direct management, it's just one individual.
Okay. And you mentioned the fact that you do a lot of training sessions to other departments or any other collaborators. Is it something that you enjoy doing?
100%. Yeah, I love teaching and driving this practice that I've kind of created myself, and helping PR people think about the way that they work in a new way. I think that a lot of people get into PR maybe because they have an aversion to mathematics and an aversion to science in some ways. That's the little bit of the wise tale out there.
Okay.
And by showing that they can, just by increasing a measurement framework, tracking some of how you currently pitch or tracking how some of you currently do your ongoing processes, you can improve and retool how you approach it in the beginning.
Okay.
So for an example, I work with one property right now who was finding that a lot of their efforts were underperforming, and they have to report those results to the ownership of the property. But by flipping it on its head and saying, this isn't what I'm doing poorly, but this is exactly what I'm doing well. And while I may not have the same scale of a New York property, I do have this incredible relationship with local broadcast media, and that can get me X. And so by helping retool and help these properties tell a unique performance narrative, they can find success and further happiness through it.
Excellent. Very, very insightful. Thank you for this. And so looking back at all of your career and all the places you worked on, what do you think is the most important project that you've worked on so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would think that the most important project I've worked on so far would be a project I worked on at Dynacare, which was Dynacare for Diabetes. It's the CSR project that runs through that corporation each year. I was only at Dynacare for just over a year, but got to help launch that campaign. It helps people in Ontario and Manitoba get tested for type 2 diabetes very early in the morning, and we are able to test over, I think, 40,000 people in the last campaign for diabetes, and found some incredibly, harrowing results. Like over 60% of the population we tested came back at high risk for type 2 diabetes. And that was an immensely, rewarding campaign to see that, PR activities can really have an impact on actual community work. And it was really providing at the point of care community health intervention. And to see the impact of that campaign was immensely rewarding.
Excellent. And so my next question is probably related to this. It was, what are you most proud of in your career as of today?
Yeah, I think what I'm most proud of is that first moment of moving to Korea, actually. I think that's where my career kind of started in some ways, because I said to myself, I really have no idea what I want to do, so let's challenge ourselves to move to a place where you don't know anybody and you have no connections, and you're just going to try and do something new and trust yourself. And it was that moment when I trusted myself that I found a new path on this new career. And then that same goes for when I took that job at rentals.ca, that I would have to commute an hour and a half a day to do a job that I really could have been doing virtually, but virtually work wasn't really commonplace back then. And so each of those moments where I've trusted myself and taken a little bit of a risk are really the highlights. And it's exciting to see it kind of all come together cumulatively in this latest role.
Okay, this is something I want to bounce back on.
Yeah.
You mentioned, indeed, since COVID, we have been a lot more used to working remotely.
Yeah.
In PR, which is a communication job, how important is it to work in person, or is it doable to work remote most of the time?
That's a great question. I say I do think you do have to have some in-person collaboration in this field. our current organization is hybrid. Particularly, this was the first role in a while where I've fully onboarded in person, and it's important for a team that works in an integrated way to have personal relationships. And this is the first workplace I've worked in where each of my coworkers, I have a personal connection with, in the sense of I would gladly, have lunch with any of my coworkers on any given day. And I genuinely appreciate each of their superpowers and what they bring to the organization. And that empowers me to be more excited and passionate about my role.
Excellent. This is goals, to have such a good relationship with your coworkers. So I asked you just before what you were most proud of. Now, looking at the other side of the coin, what is the most difficult situation you ever had to handle, and do you have any tips of how to get out of it?
Yeah, when I burned out, that was definitely the most difficult thing I've had to deal with, particularly because you don't really know what's happening when it's happening. I knew the moment was for me when we had this little calm app on our phones, and I was hitting the SOS, like calm meditation, once a day. If you have to take an SOS meditation once a day to get through the workday, you may want to consider looking at how you're approaching your work-life balance. And that was difficult because it was hard I left the organization of my own regard without a job lined up, because I needed the time to reflect and reassess and have a break from work, which I had been doing for 50, 60 hours a week. And so, and I think it's really important for everybody to take that time for yourself when you need it. And then knowing, as I know as a communications professional, that you'll have to explain a little bit of what that time was and why you needed it. But every major workplace will understand that we all have times where we need to prioritize ourselves in order to show up and be the best employee that we can be. And I think that's an equally important thing when it comes to being a leader in an organization, to recognize that in others and know that you're not driving just an output, but you're driving an individual who's trying to grow their career. And you always want to put yourself in that person's shoes, and that goes back to that whole leading with empathy point. If you can really lead and see what do I need in that situation? How do I be the best person for them? You can really drive and help shape what you really like in an organic way, as opposed to forcing someone who may be a square hole to fit in a circle peg.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that is important to hear nowadays. Thank you for this. Now, what are the most important skills that you have acquired in your career so far?
Yeah, the most important skill, I think, is clear communication, listening, and then, to bang on the point a little more, empathy. But when I say empathy, I previously meant it in a way of relating to others, but also in how you drive and learn from each interaction you've just had. So the big thing I've learned on is how to reflect on past experiences and grow from each interaction and project that I've worked on before. That's really that whole insights to action piece. I worked on several campaigns in my early days at Edelman that drastically did not succeed. But if I've learned anything, it's that the answer is never zero, the answer is never nothing, and the answer is never, I don't know. You can always learn something from a previously, what you would consider failure or a bad experience, and reframe it in a way that is a new story that shows growth and potential. I have an example of a time I worked for a giant technology client and overbilled a project by like 100 hours because I could have just asked and said, I don't know, but I was too junior and too scared to say, I don't know. And so I spiraled, and I spent all this time trying to do work that I wasn't qualified or a good data analyst enough to perform. And as a result, the project didn't succeed. And I had to go back to the client and say, this isn't working. I shouldn't have been staffed on this initially. I'm not the person you need. But now having that skill set, it's just as important now to be able to say, I'm not the person you need, and step back, particularly when you're working in a consulting environment. Nowadays at Four Seasons, where if I'm working on a project and say, I'm not a data scientist, I am a communications person first and a data-driven storyteller second. If I'm going into a project that's integrated internally, I'm going to be the first one to say, hands up, I'm not the person you need, but this person I do know is the superpower, is the superhero you need to drive this project forward. And if that's one thing that I've learned about, is know what you can do and know just as much as what you can't.
These are very wise and insightful words. Thank you very much for this. Now, trying to get into other people's head for a second, how do you think your coworkers and collaborators perceive you? How would they describe you? And has this perception ever changed throughout your career?
I think I've been pretty steady in my career and how people perceive me. I think what I bring the most is a passion for what I do. And I love to lift others people's up in their own passions. So I was lucky to join this organization on the same day as a colleague, Brittany. So I think if I were to ask her what she would see as, a passionate person who leads with empathy and drives a practice forward with that same vigor and tenacity. Because that's what I think I've done since the beginning of the day. And really, if you boil it all down, all I really am is someone who is innately incredibly curious every single day. My number one website is Wikipedia. I love to just learn about random things at all time. And that same curiosity has followed me through to this career today, where I learn about what are the travel trends now, or who are the latest influencers making impact. And that same curiosity took me into genetics, where I was learning who are the latest innovations in genetics and what are happening when I was at Dynacare, learning exciting things about that field, just the same way I was equally excited about shampoos and computer chips. And as you can bring that level of curiosity to each different thing and find a way to remain passionate about what you do, that curiosity and energy will transfer project to project.
Excellent. And so now, getting back to the manager's cap,
Yeah.
in your opinion, what is an ideal employee, and how do you notice high potential in employees?
I think a great employee is somebody who can put their own energy and personality into their role and create it organically within themselves. And that is to say, don't try and fit X parts into a role that isn't fit for you, in the sense of, if you're seeing a job post and you're saying, I could be a data analyst if I really try and I have that kind of skill set, that's going to show up if you're really, a communications person who's trying to become a data analyst. When I was job hunting after that, after I burned out, I tried to go into, maybe I could do data and analysis full time. And interviewers could tell that wasn't what I wanted to do. That wasn't what I was passionate about. And I was trying to force myself to be something I wasn't. That being said, if you're trying to get into a field that you maybe have less experience on, bringing in transferable skills that can create that same energy is amazing. If you are a person who wants to enter PR today and you don't have a background in it, read up on it. Look at how the industry is changing today and bring a unique perspective to it. Maybe you're somebody who speaks 3 languages. What does the changing industry in PR and the media landscape look like right now through your perspective? And bring that energy into your cover letter, into your resume. And that's how you'll get that entry-level first start role. And find people who you genuinely feel like are leaders that you relate to. That's where I started. I found people in this industry who had the career path I wanted or had a career path I aspired to at that time. That doesn't mean they're those same people that I had on day one or the same people today. That can shift as your career shifts. But if my main advice is, if you're looking to get into PR today, it's really bring what you believe is special about yourself into your job, because that's going to keep that energy alive through your entire career.
Yeah, you just said something very interesting, is to follow people who inspire you and so on. How do you find these people? Sometimes it's a challenge to find mentors and proper examples to follow. How are you able to find these people?
I first found mine through my Humber program, through a lot of coffee chats. I had a lot, and this was a little bit easier, I will say, back then than it is today. I think right now, I will be honest, the job market is very hot and people are actively looking for these kinds of roles, and people are actively trying to network, and there's a little bit of network burnout happening right now. I always try my best to make extra time for even at least a 30-minute phone call with students and with people who are looking to get in to this industry, and to provide, honest feedback on resumes and cover letters. But the main point I'll have is really trying to find any person you can speak to get their advice. Networking sessions are helpful for this. I did a lot of cold outreach on LinkedIn.
Wow.
I will always say, always don't just cold invite, always do the little message and really look up the person. You can find out all the things that I've worked on and the events I've attended on the internet. having one unique line that's like, I really loved that rental report you wrote at the beginning of your career. How did you write that? Is a way better entry than, hey, I saw you. Can you help me find a job?
Sure. Very well said. Thank you very much for this. And so the other part of the question was, how do you notice high potential in employees?
Yes, thank you for bringing me back to that. I think you notice high potential in someone who's shown up prepared, and this is a little bit easier said than done. I don't want to self-talk myself out of this, but there is a fair bit of luck that I think I've had in my career, and I think a lot of people will say that, by admitting there's a little bit of luck, you're disqualifying your skills or you're talking yourself down. But I think there is. I got to join this career at a certain time where that market was hot, and I was at the right time to enter a tech company when tech companies were still booming. And I was able to get that whole first start through a really organic field. And that happened pretty organically for me. And that doesn't mean I didn't put a lot of hard work and have to have the tenacity and the energy to follow it through, but there was a little bit of luck of timing there. When you're looking for someone who has high potential in this field right now, they're bringing that own unique energy to the role, and they're putting their own spin on it that feels organic. And you can, as I mentioned before, kind of understand when somebody is trying to fit themselves into an industry or into a role that they necessarily don't fully believe in, or they aren't fully invested in, and that can be difficult. So you really want to assess and say to yourself, this is what I bring, and not this is what they want from me. And when you really say, this is how I can fit within this role, and feel free to fight back against a job description is really what I'm trying to say. If I'm trying to assess your potential, I want you to answer honestly. I don't want you to just tell me what you think I want to hear. Because that's where you find the most unique candidates, is when someone says, I actually really can only do 60% of what this job description says. That's amazing. You should never be able to do 100% of any job description, because you have to learn all the other skills in there. If you can do 3 of the things really well and 2 of the things you don't know how to do at all, that's amazing. I can teach you how to write Boolean search strings. I can't really teach you to have the innate drive and energy to get you through each workday and be excited about our mission and what we do every day. You need to bring that energy to me, and I can teach you the hard skills that are required in that job description.
This is very good to hear. Maybe not every HR manager knows not to check every boxes, so this is nice to hear. Maybe taking a step back.
Yeah.
What's the most important thing you learned in school?
It's a great question. I'm going to take as a 2-part answer. In undergrad, I think I learned 3-part answer. The most important thing I learned in school and high school was creative problem solving. I was a big theater kid, and through my extracurriculars, I learned how to solve a problem through a creative lens using the skills I had at the time. In undergrad, I learned critical thinking. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I did learn how to apply research to a problem and follow timelines to meet deliverables that were papers. I will be honest, I don't think I was a person meant for academia. I never really thought, I can't write with the directive I want to argue this. And then I had to use kind of passive opinions. I've always been someone who wants to have an opinion and state that opinion and believe it. And then when I went to college and I did this postgrad program, I really think the most important thing I learned was the research classes I took. And even though those were people's least favorite classes, those insights classes, that's where I was like, wow, there is a discipline within this field that I can hone and find, a perspective in and make it my specialty and bring that superpower to life within my work. So it was really a steady projection of learning transferable skills at each of my different education points.
Excellent. This is a great transition for my next question. So you described your job as a peer manager as something that based on 2 pillars, data and storytelling. Can you tell us how important are they to PR?
Yeah.
And how do they complement each other that well?
It's a great question. When you think of data-driven storytelling, you have 3 components. You have the data, you have the narrative, and you have the visual. And you need all 3 components to really tell a strong data-driven story. If you just have the visual and you don't have the data, you're just going to be telling a really bland story. But really, when you have all 3 of those components, it really allows you to tell a holistic, believable, and unique story. And I don't think that is just relevant to how we think about corporate PR. I think that's relevant to a great movie. If you don't have the strong, believable data points of your characters and the unique plot that drives you all the way through it, it's not going to be a really believable movie. The same way, if you shoot it on an iPhone without a great visual or a lovely shot and complete idea of its visual entity, it's not going to be a really attractive movie. And in the same way, if you have no narrative that runs through the entire movie, there's nothing really to follow and it has no logic to it. So when you kind of bring all those three elements together, you're telling something that has a unique entity that is measurable and also cyclical, so you can repeat it. And that's a big thing that I really try and stow upon all the different PR practitioners in our global network. It's really helping them tell a holistic story time after time and to learn from each story as it ends. So if you just had a campaign go to market and it didn't go well, and you spent money that wasn't maybe spent in the most efficient way, you may be wanting to say to your managers, this didn't go well. How do I pivot and learn more? You always want to try and say, this is what we did learn, and this is how we're going to empower the next campaign with those learnings. Because if you didn't set this up, if you didn't set up your measurement to start with, and you didn't have a way to learn from that failure of that campaign, then you would have had no way to spin it around again at the end and say, this is actually a positive thing. So that whole data-driven storytelling way is really a way to foolproof each campaign or each PR activation to making it always a positive narrative for yourself.
Okay, and back to the measurements of these campaigns that we touched before. How long does it take for a campaign to be set and to have the results back in?
That's a great question. It varies greatly on how big the scale of the campaign is. So to give you perspective, I currently work for a global organization that has the brand level and the property levels, right? Okay. So we are the brand level where we help tell the story from the central entity that is Four Seasons, but we also have properties. You have Four Seasons Toronto here, Four Seasons Montreal, which run their own smaller scale localized campaigns. Mm-hmm. I'm more focused on empowering those localized stories while also running the brand stories. So those big, global flashy Four Seasons campaigns, they're going to have a lot more behind them in terms of intricacies and integrations than the smaller local ones will sometimes. That doesn't mean that some of those local campaigns aren't huge in scale often. Often they are, but the support behind them may not be as large as the giant brand ones that we launch. So they're going to have different timelines on how you can learn. But even if I just host a one-day, press junket for a movie that's being hosted on our property, you can learn just as much in that one day if you're set up for success as you can the multi-year ad campaign that the major brand is running down the street. It's just making sure you have the same setups in place when it comes to identifying your goals, how you're going to measure it, the key audiences involved, and ensuring that same kind of cyclical process is followed, regardless if you're doing a half-day campaign activation in the mall or you're doing a 5-year-long multi-touch point ad campaign.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so now we've talked about it a little bit earlier as well, but now the world of communication and PR is pretty saturated on the job market perspective, and is very competitive. What do you think someone who's interested in working in communication/PR should do in order to stand out in such a competitive field at the moment?
That's a great question. I would think to stand out in today's competitive PR field, I would encourage people to bring their own transferable skills into their roles. So you're seeing, as I mentioned previously, that line between marketing and PR forever dissolve. And so if you are someone who is a creative production person, maybe you're a content creator on the side and you have all these video editing skills, that is just as valuable to a PR team as now it is to a marketing team. And having that unique content lens is something that you can bring into to a PR role. Even if you're not necessarily as strong at the media relations or the writing side of it, there are advantageous transferable skills you can bring into this career that are ever valuable. And then remaining on top of how this industry is shifting, we're seeing media markets shift. We're seeing some major publications close right now, and we're seeing how audience consume traditional media change. Yeah. The media market is shifting, and people are reading their news now more on social media. How does that change how PR practitioners are going to do PR in 10 years versus now? the same people and key audiences that we have now are not going to be the same that we have in 10 years. So we need to change with that time. And it's going to be a new generation of PR practitioners now who are doing PR entirely differently than people have for the last 30, 40 years.
That's a good point. Thank you for this. Now, trying to look outside of the communication and PR sphere. So from the outside, we often think of PR workers and communication workers as the people in the companies responsible to make statements and communicate when in times of crisis or when controversy happens. Is this something that ever happened to you, number one? And how often does it happen? And do you understand this perception that we can have from the outside?
100%. Yeah, I think you think of those shows like Scandal, or you think about some other, more, or Samantha Jones in Sex and the City, who does like these flashy events, and she works in PR and she does like flashy kind of brand events. Those are the kind of popular culture perceptions of PR. Olivia or Pope, who does the like crisis kind of side of it, and then the flashy events that Samantha Jones does. When I got into consumer PR, I thought, oh, it's all going to be flashy brand events. It's not. Most days are still just email, PowerPoints, and Excel. But there are the side fun moments. Those crisis moments that you discuss they do happen. I actually specialized in kind of a more insight side of crisis when I was at Edelman, and I now work on a similar practice at Four Seasons. I am myself not what you would consider crisis communications specialist. So I am not the one who would be leading a client through a crisis campaign, but I have worked on several. From what you would consider a best, kind of example of this would be more of like a 911 dispatch operator. I help align that information in real time to ensure that the news information, the social media information, it's all created in a dashboard that can give our crisis team the ability to make informed decisions in real time. And I do help counsel on that. It is a stressful environment, as you can imagine, but it's all handled in a very managed and practiced way, where you're just trying to limit the impact to reputation as much as possible. And a lot of that work also is in what you don't see, because a lot of it is preventing things that you may not know even have to happen. And so if a crisis person is doing their job the best, you'll have never heard about the incident at all.
Excellent. And do you know any good practices in terms of crisis situation that you would be comfortable sharing?
I can't give you direct examples, but I will say I have a funny story. When my first ever crisis, I joined as a company. It was a company that was in COVID having to close, a major Canadian retailer. And I learned quite quickly, I tried to bring my youthful, excited energy to the 6 a.m. call. And I started that call off by saying, how's everybody doing today? Are you having a great day? And then I had a side message from the VP on the call saying, we're closing their company today. Of course they're not having a good day. And I learned quite quickly that, you're going to be having to do, once again, this empathy thing where you lead and understand how people are coming to this job, and you really have to match them where they're at and drive that kind of work through with empathy. So I learned quite quickly it's a different skill set altogether to work in crisis than it is in a more traditional PR environment.
Very interesting. Again, thank you for this. And so, since you worked into so many different industries, what is your thought process while tackling a new industry and to adapt a new communication strategy on a field that you just discovered?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, in PR, we are lucky enough to really be able to transfer skill sets and transfer, that same tactic that we're doing for one campaign and switch the subject matter altogether. I really think it's just the unique creativity that you get to bring and ensuring you bring that same kind of excited energy to each different topic and finding something that you find interesting within each of these new fields, because that's what's going to get you up in the morning. And to make it say something, can you really read 50 news articles about that subject every single day? If you can't, then maybe it's not the industry for you. That's a good thing to remember in PR. You want to make sure you're able to really love and find some passion in some form of the subject matter. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for you to be, that person talking to the press. If that's not necessarily your key interest, that energy will, be visible.
Another very good insight, thank you. Now, taking another step back, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received throughout your career, and would you give that same piece of advice to your 20-year-old self?
Oh, yeah. Don't take it all so seriously. That's something that I think I try and tell myself all the time. I would say if there was one celebrity that I really want to meet, that's Larry David. I'm a big fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm and that type of sense of humor. I was a big Seinfeld fan. Those 5 years in New York that I lived really shaped me as a child. And he doesn't take life so seriously. And there's a saying in this industry, it's PR, not ER. So remember, at the end of the day, the press release may not get out, the thing may not happen, the event may be a total disarray, but it's PR, not ER. Let's not take ourselves so seriously. There's those very rare crisis moments in a crisis person's career where it can be really ER, but 99% of the time it's not. So remind yourself of that and take a deep breath. And once again, lead with empathy, because if someone's having a bad day, let them go home. There's no point in forcing them to fit that work order that they're not going to be motivated to do.
Excellent. Thank you for this again. We are now moving to the last few questions of this interview.
For sure.
So first of all, how would you like to be remembered by your coworkers/collaborators once you retire?
I would like to hit that same message again, that he was very passionate about what he did, but he didn't let it control his life. I really think we spend a little bit too much time focusing on how our careers will impact our life instead of letting our lives impact our careers. Your career should be something that empowers you to live your life. It shouldn't be something that is your life. And I really think that balance is something that we've all learned and loved. And just because you're incredibly passionate and want to spend all your time at work doesn't necessarily mean you should. You should allow that passage and energy to be dispersed throughout many parts of your life. And just because I love and feel drive and want to be at my work doesn't necessarily mean I should be there at all times.
Very beautiful. Thank you for this. And so final question of this interview, what can we wish you for the future?
Oh, that's so... In the short term, I'm going to take a vacation. I'm going to go back to South Korea actually in June.
Wow.
So I'm excited for that. It's going to be my first time returning to go to a friend's wedding. So in the short term, you can wish me great air conditioning, as I'll be going there in June. And in the long term, I hope you can see me in the long term starting this own practice and driving insights to action wherever I may be.
Very beautiful. That's all we wish you then. Thank you so very much, Ben, for being with us today. This was Ben Murchison on Business Minds.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Crazy how many emails you can get in an hour. That's actually insane. Okay. It's all good. I'm here.
Thank you. So...